What is up, guys? It's your boy SteadyChaos coming to you with another video, and I've been getting a few questions lately about my picture settings for gaming in HDR on the LG C10. So usually I don't do picture setting videos because, in my opinion, picture settings for televisions are so subjective. Really, it's up to the person that owns their own TV to really kind of calibrate or set up their picture settings to their liking, and that, like I said, is very subjective. It varies from person to person, so I've never really been too interested in kind of telling somebody else what I feel is my best picture setting, because really they might not like it at all. But since I've been getting a few people asking in the comment section for my picture settings for the LG C10 when gaming in HDR, I figured, what the hell, if the people want it, then I might as well at least let them know what I'm using for a setting. So here you see Death Stranding, and it is looking nice and colorful in my opinion. So why don't we run through real quick here what my settings are for the C10. So the first thing you'll notice is it's on game mode. So you're going to want it on game mode if you're gaming, for obviously the lowest input lag or the least amount of latency. So then we go into all settings. And a few things to look at here, not air service, so go back to picture. Now you're going to want to start down here on OLED screensaver. Now logo luminance adjustment, you want that on low. You don't really want to put it on high, because there have been some reports that setting logo luminance adjustment to high can actually tinker with the brightness settings of your panel. Whereas if it's on low, typically the brightness of your panel is unaffected. And I've read something about this on Artings, where they've said that having the logo luminance adjustment to high can negatively or adversely impact your brightness. So just keep that on low. And then moving on up to additional settings. Now you want eye comfort mode to be off. You don't want the TV to be tinkering with your brightness for eye comfort. And then you go down to instant game response. Make sure that this is turned on for the specific HDMI port that you're using. So you get the lowest latency and you get auto low latency mode. So that means basically when the port detects that you've turned on a PlayStation or an Xbox, it automatically switches over to game mode, so you're getting the lowest input lag you can possibly get. So make sure that's on. Then go to HDMI Ultra HD Deep Color, and make sure that the port you're using your video game system on, that the HDMI Deep Color is also set to on for that port, that HDMI port. That's the only way you're going to get HDR 10-bit color, is if the HDMI Ultra Color setting is set to on. So these two, make sure they're on. So going back up now, energy saving off. You do not want to put the energy saving on, because if you put it on maximum, look at the screen. It dimmed like crazy. So obviously it's saving energy. It's the pixels are becoming dimmer. They're requiring less energy. If you go to medium, a little bit brighter. Minimum, a little bit brighter still. And then you go to off, and that's the brightest your panel can get. That's what you want for HDR gaming. Sorry, environment, but HDR gaming is more important. Really, honestly, TVs nowadays are so energy efficient, they really don't contribute much to your electricity bill. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. So here, I'm only showing you my settings for HDR gaming, as most new games nowadays on the PlayStation 4 Pro and the Xbox One X are going to be HDR compatible games. They're just a select few games that aren't HDR, but we'll save that video for another time when we do the SDR calibration. So HDR picture mode, I have my OLED light to 100. And my contrast to 100. Now when the TV detects an HDR source, it automatically sets your OLED light to 100 and your contrast to 100. Now you want that added brightness from these settings at 100, because that is what makes your HDR pop. That's what gives you that vibrant color, and it just really is aesthetically pleasing. So if you were to lower your values on OLED light and contrast to 80 or 75, say, when you're looking at HDR content, then you're not going to really enjoy the full capability of your TV as it relates to HDR content. So I would leave those both at 100. Obviously, if it's an SDR game, that's a different story. You don't need the OLED light and contrast at 100. Only for HDR. Now, brightness setting, that is normally at 50. I leave that there. I don't tinker with that. Sharpness, now this one is subjective. A lot of people I see, especially professional calibrators, for some reason they'll set it at 0. And I don't quite understand why. Perhaps they're trying to get the smoothest picture quality they can to eliminate any kind of aliasing or jaggies. I suppose I get that, but for my tastes, it makes the picture a little bit too soft. I guess if you're using a native 4K source, you can get away with a really low sharpness. But if you're using something that's upscaled to 4K like this game is, or you're using a 1080p or 720p content on a 4K panel like the LG CX, and you're going to want to give yourself a little bit of sharpness. All it is really, sharpness is just edge enhancement. So again, I'm not telling you what to do here. Like I said, some people say it should be 0. I get that with high resolution sources. If it's a lower res source, something upconverted, something 720p, then I would give myself a little bit more sharpness. Usually for PlayStation 4 Pro games, they're anywhere between 1440p and 1800p, and then checkerboard upscaled to 4K. So with that in mind, I usually set my sharpness anywhere between 10 and 15. It really depends on the game, and it depends on my mood. So here it's 15. Color, another subjective one. I like my colors to really pop. Normally on game mode, it's set to 55 color. That's the default setting. I like to have a little bit more vibrancy with my color, so I set it to 60. Again, totally subjective. Whatever is most pleasing to your eye, certainly you should do that. There's no right or wrong when you set your picture settings. So moving on down, tint, I don't touch tint. Advanced control. Now here, all these extra advanced control settings and picture option settings, most of them I just turn off. I want the most bright color I can get in HDR, which is why OLED level light and contrast are 100. Other than that, I don't want to be using any kind of artificial metric like dynamic contrast or super resolution to alter the picture too much, because then you're really getting away from what the game developers intended in terms of visuals. So if you look at dynamic contrast, if I were to turn it on to low, it kind of just, it blows out his face a little bit. It makes the skin tone a little bit less natural. See that? So here it's on off. You see he has nice flesh tones in his ear and his face. If I put it on low, I just feel like it makes him look pale. And I just don't like how that looks. You can go up to medium. It blows out the picture a little bit more. What it's basically doing is it's just adding brightness, dynamic contrast. It's artificially adding brightness. And then here's the highest. The highest setting actually doesn't look too bad. But like I said, it looks great on off. So I just stick with off. I feel like it's the most natural color grading that the game developers intended. And also when you put it on high or even low, I feel like you risk potentially clipping your white levels. It makes the picture in some instances so bright that you could lose definition in the bright white levels, and you really don't want to do that. So just keep it off. That would be my recommendation. And then moving on to dynamic tone mapping. Now this is a new option for the 2019 LG C9 and the 2020 LG C10. Dynamic tone mapping I set to on because I feel like it gives it the most bright and vibrant and pleasing picture possible. But every game I've found is kind of different in how dynamic tone mapping looks. If I were to go to off, you see the picture gets kind of dim. It's not nearly as pleasing. You go back to on, it's nice and bright and colorful. That's rich. It's a rich image. Now HGIG is a new option, like I said, for the 2019 and 2020 LG OLED models. And this is a form of high dynamic range specifically for gaming. Now, it's such a new standard that not many games have actually been developed with HGIG in mind. And therefore, I don't really use it all that often because I feel like this too, kind of like the off setting, it dims the picture. So let's turn HGIG on now. See how dim the picture got? You know, and there's really little difference between HGIG being on and then dynamic tone mapping being off entirely. Let's see the difference. Off, HGIG. Off, I don't see a difference, do you? HGIG. But when you go to dynamic tone mapping on, bam, that color just explodes. That image brightens right up and it looks real nice. So my suggestion is, it depends on the game. Just tinker around with it, play with it, and see what looks best to you. But I find more often than not, dynamic tone mapping is the brighter and more aesthetically pleasing setting for HDR gaming. Moving down to super resolution. Again, another one of those artificial settings. I don't really use it. Let's see, put on low, medium, or high. You really don't want to over sharpen the picture too much, because then you could be adding in some digital noise, and you could be exacerbating any aliasing that might be present in a game. There isn't a whole lot of aliasing in Death Stranding. This game looks absolutely beautiful, but my recommendation is to keep it off. But again, it's totally up to you. You do whatever you feel is best for your television and your experience. Oh, my controller turned off. Let's get a new angle on Sam. Sam stood up.
Let's get back to work.
All right. Color gamut, just set that to auto. If you just set it to auto, the TV will automatically select the right color gamut for you, depending on HDR source or SDR source. Gamma, you can't change. That's just the midtones. White balance, I keep it on warm 1. Otherwise, I don't mess with any of these other settings. I haven't looked up a calibration setting for the CX yet. That's something I may do in the future. But typically, color temperature, I keep warm 1 or medium. I feel like medium's a little bit too cool. OLED TVs tend to run a little bit on the bluer side, so I like to warm them up just a bit. Warm 1. Warm 2, in my opinion, is a little bit too yellowish, and warm 3 is way too yellow. Warm 1 seems to be a good compromise. And then moving down to color management, again, these are more complex settings or more advanced settings, if you will. I don't really mess with these. I may look up a color profile calibration setting online at some point, but for now I'm not touching these, and I wouldn't recommend you touch them either. And peak brightness is automatically set to high when viewing HDR content. That is normal, you want that. And moving down to picture options. Now, noise reduction, it says it removes irregular and erratic pixels for a clearer image. Well, I mean, you're already playing a game that is probably 1440p or 1800p and upscale to a pretty clean 4K. So I feel like you're not going to have a lot of noise to begin with. If I were to set the noise to high, I don't notice any difference in the picture. You might even soften the picture a little bit if you set the noise reduction to high. So I would just recommend you leave it off to keep that nice, clear, crisp, pristine HDR gaming image. Now again, if you're playing a game that is 720p or you're streaming low bitrate content, that's 480p, then sure, run the noise reduction to high to try to clean up the image. But with a game like Death Stranding, a new game that's running at a fairly high resolution and is nice and clean, you don't need any noise reduction. Same thing with MPEG noise reduction, you just don't need it. Smooth gradation, now this TV is susceptible to some minor, very minor banding here and there in certain games. I don't notice it in movies or TV watching or internet browsing. Only in certain games, and it's usually in like skylines from, say, a darker shade of blue to a lighter shade of blue. Now you can set the smooth gradation to high to eliminate some of this banding, but it will not remove the banding entirely. And again, you might soften your image a little bit. So I keep it at off to keep a nice clear image. And like I said, any banding you might experience is intermittent. It's pretty sporadic, and it's not all that aggressive, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. Black level, you want to keep your black level at low. If you go to a high black level, you might have better visibility, but as you can see, you're washing out your picture. You're losing that good contrast and pop, so I would definitely keep your black level to low. And auto is the same thing. Auto seems to keep it on low as well, but I would keep it on low. Real cinema is off. It's not an option you can use in game mode. Motion eye care, again, it says that the TV will automatically adjust the brightness by analyzing image movements. You do not want to turn this on for gaming. especially HDR gaming. Like we've said, and I'm belaboring the point, I know, but you want that 100 OLED light and you want that 100 contrast for that vibrant, colorful picture with HDR gaming. If you turn motion eye care on, the TV will take it upon itself to adjust the brightness all over the place, and it would be distracting and you wouldn't be getting an optimal picture for HDR gaming. So I would recommend that you keep motion eye care off. Now True Motion, I don't turn this on. True Motion is black frame insertion. The CX has the new Alpha 9 Gen 3 processor. It's a great processor, has great motion handling, which is why I feel like I can get away with keeping it on off. But if you wanted black frame insertion up to 120 hertz, obviously this game is not 120 hertz, but it is, the CX is natively capable of doing BFI at 120 hertz. But if you want BFI for this game, which runs at 30 hertz, you can turn it on, low, medium, high, or auto. Now I keep it off because, like I said, the motion processing is already very good to begin with on the Alpha 9 Gen 3 processor with the CX. And another reason why I keep it off is watch what happens when I set it to low. Watch the brightness. Stand Sam up. Let's look at a bright area here. Right here. Let's look at the skyline, kinda. Now I'm gonna turn it to low. See that? The screen just got a little bit dimmer as a result of turning black frame insertion on. And if you turn it to moderate or medium, the screen gets even dimmer. And then you turn it to high and whew, is it dim? It's very dim, and there's a little bit of perceptible flicker, which is really distracting in my opinion. And a lot of your details with BFI set to high, especially in like shadow detail areas and dark areas, it's crushing the blacks. So you're losing shadow detail. So I would, that is exactly why I set this to either low or off entirely. Look at this image when it's off. It is so bright and vibrant and pops, and his skin tone looks natural. The colors on the shipping containers on his back look nice and bright and vivid. If you're going to low, you're not compromising too much brightness and you're gaining a little bit more motion clarity, though by turning black frame insertion on, you are also adding a touch bit of input lag too. So keep that in mind. You do whatever you feel is best for you as a gamer and what feels most comfortable. But to me, having the BFI set to off provides the brightest, most vibrant HDR picture, and I don't really feel like by having it off I'm losing much in the way of motion. Okay? And that's really it for all the various settings. So again, all these extraneous options as far as HDR gaming on the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X, they already are so sharp and vivid to begin with, these HDR games nowadays, that you don't need any of these gimmicky things. You don't need noise reduction or smooth gradation, motion eye care. You don't even need BFI in my opinion, although it is a nice option to have. And then same song and dance for advanced controls. You don't need dynamic contrast because you could be clipping your white levels. You don't want to do that. You don't need super resolution because these games are already running at a fairly high resolution to begin with. Your color gamut, just leave that at auto. All this stuff, just leave pretty much where it is, except for your color temperature. I'd recommend a warm 1. And then to come back to what we had, 100, 150, 15, 60, and 0. So those are my picture settings for HDR gaming across the board. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Perhaps I will do a picture setting video for 4K Blu-rays in the future at some point. If there's something else you guys want to see in the future for the LG C10, you want me to test something for you and record it and post it to YouTube, let me know. I'm certainly willing to try and help you guys out. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And until next time, guys, we'll see you later. Take care. Bye.